It started like a dream. He adored you, laughed at your jokes, held your hand like you were the most precious thing in the world. In the beginning, your flaws were cute, your quirks were charming, and your emotions were beautiful. You felt seen, admired, maybe even safe. But something changed. Slowly, quietly, subtly. It wasn't immediate, it was strategic. At first you noticed he would get distant when you were sad. He didn't like it when you cried. When you got anxious, he'd sigh, roll his eyes, or leave the room. And when you were angry, even for a good reason, he'd call you dramatic, overreacting, unstable. And that's when it began. The conditioning. You learned that love came with rules, with performance, with restraint. You learned to shrink your emotions, not because you wanted to, but because you feared losing him. He didn't have to say it out loud. You knew. He only stayed close when you were pleasant, when you were easy to be around, when you smiled, when you didn't challenge him, when you were manageable. So you started editing yourself, smoothing out your sharp edges, smiling when you were crumbling inside, laughing when you wanted to scream, because somewhere along the line, he made you believe that your feelings were the problem, not his refusal to hold space for them, and you carried that belief like a chain. You stopped crying in front of him, you stopped asking for reassurance, you stopped expressing needs because every time you did, he punished you with distance, or worse, with silence. You'd lie awake at night, wondering if you were too much, wondering if he'd leave, and the worst part, you started apologizing not just for how you felt, but for who you were, as if being a whole human being was a crime, as if your emotional depth was a flaw instead of a gift. You weren't looking for a therapist. You weren't being needy, you just wanted to be loved in all your layers. But he only loved the version of you that didn't require depth. He didn't love you, he loved easy. There was a moment, you don't even remember when, where you stopped being in a relationship and started performing in one. Every interaction became calculated, every word rehearsed, every expression softened. You were no longer loving, you were managing his moods, managing his silence, managing his disappointment. You learned how to avoid the topics that made him uncomfortable. You memorized his emotional thresholds. You tiptoed through conversations like a tightrope walker, afraid of falling into another cold stare or passive-aggressive sigh. You stopped speaking freely, you stopped feeling safe, and somewhere along the way, you stopped being you. But to the outside world, you looked fine, maybe even happy, because you smiled in the pictures, because you said we're doing great when people asked, because he wasn't cruel, not in ways they could see. He didn't yell, he didn't hit, he didn't cheat, not that you knew of. So you felt like you had no right to complain, but inside, you were suffocating, dying a slow, quiet death. And it was your own hands around your throat, because you were the one silencing yourself. You were the one editing your soul to fit into his comfort zone. And every time you swallowed your feelings, a part of you disappeared. The worst part was, he made you feel like it was noble, like your emotional restraint was a sign of maturity. He praised you when you were chill. He admired you when you were unbothered, so you wore detachment like armor, not realizing it was also a muzzle. You became emotionally numb, because numbness was safer than rejection. And in that numbness, you convinced yourself this was love. That real love required endurance, tolerance, sacrifice. But deep down, a quiet voice kept asking, why do I feel lonelier next to him than I did when I was alone? You knew the answer, you just couldn't bear to say it out loud. Because, if love meant being easy to handle, then who were you allowed to be when it got hard? He used to say how peaceful things were with you, how easy you were to love, how drama-free, how refreshing it felt to be with someone who wasn't needy. And for a while, you believed that was a compliment. You wore it like a badge, because that's what he trained you to do. But what he called peace was your silence. What he described as balance was your repression. And what he admired most, your emotional maturity, was actually your fear of being abandoned if you ever spoke up. He wasn't loving you. He was loving the absence of your voice. You see it now, don't you? All the things you didn't say, all the tears you hid, the moments you wanted to scream, I'm not okay, but instead you whispered, I'm just tired. You knew that showing weakness would shift his mood, that vulnerability would turn him cold. So you swallowed every wave that rose in your chest and smiled instead, because you were trained to believe that love meant stability, and stability meant silence. So you silenced yourself, piece by piece, emotion by emotion, until your presence was palatable but your essence was gone. And the irony, the more you disappeared for his comfort, the more disconnected you felt. You thought love was supposed to be a place where your full self could exist, but with him, your full self was too loud, too messy, too intense. So you became smaller, simpler, smoother. You became a version of yourself that wouldn't scare him away. And when you started losing your voice, your joy, your vibrancy, he didn't notice. He only noticed when you broke character, when you cried, when you asked for more, when you reminded him, even for a moment, that you were not a robot, but a human being with a soul that deserved to be held, not managed. There's always a moment, quiet, undramatic, but irreversible. The moment you realize, he doesn't want all of you. He wants the light parts, the soft laughter, the compliant silence, The version of you that doesn't question, doesn't tremble, doesn't hurt. And when that realization hits you, it doesn't feel like rage. It feels like grief. A slow, sinking grief. Because you finally see it, he didn't love you. He loved the version of you that made him feel safe. The version that didn't challenge his ego, that didn't require emotional depth, that didn't demand growth. He loved the mask, not the soul beneath it. You started replaying every conversation in your head. The way his face changed when you cried. The way he distanced himself when you were anxious. The way he'd go cold when you were overwhelmed. You used to think it was you, that you were too emotional, too chaotic. But now, you see the pattern. You see how your vulnerability was never welcome. It was tolerated at best, resented at worst. You realize how you trained yourself to be pleasant, palatable, peaceful, not because you wanted to, but because love was conditional. And the condition was, be easy. And the hardest part, he still thinks he was a good partner. He still tells his friends how low maintenance you were. He'll say he never yelled, never cheated, never mistreated you. And technically he's right. Because what he did can't be seen in bruises. It's not measured in screams. It's measured in how many parts of yourself you buried to keep him close. In how you used to cry without making a sound. In how you learned to breathe without being noticed. He didn't break you with violence. He broke you with absence of empathy, of depth, of real connection. And now you know. He didn't fall out of love with you. He fell out of control. And that's when the affections stopped. Somewhere along the way, you stopped confusing love with safety, and started confusing silence with peace. You thought that if things were quiet, they were okay. That if he wasn't angry, you were doing something right. That if he wasn't leaving, he must still care. But you never stopped to ask, what kind of love needs you to mute your soul to survive? What kind of peace costs you your voice? He never asked you to be quiet directly. He didn't need to. Every time you spoke your truth and he pulled away, that was the lesson. Every time you expressed sadness and he responded with cold logic, that was the punishment. Every time you asked for more and he accused you of being difficult, that was the training. And over time, you learned. You learned how to bite your tongue, how to regulate your tone, how to anticipate his mood before he even walked through the door. You thought you were being supportive, loving, patient, but what you were really doing was disappearing. And yet, you kept showing up, not as yourself, but as the version he rewarded with affection. The version that didn't cry, that didn't confront, that didn't question. You were praised for being calm, but you were never calm. You were disconnected. You were distant even from yourself. And you started believing that's what healthy relationships looked like. That this was maturity. That real love was meant to feel numb. But real love is not numb. Real love doesn't flinch at emotion. It doesn't recoil from tears. It doesn't punish pain. It holds you. It hears you. It honors all your colors, not just the easy ones. It wasn't loud. It wasn't planned. It wasn't some grand explosion. It was just one moment. A crack in the performance, a single breath where you stopped pretending. You let the sadness rise, let the anger show, let the truth slip through. Your lips like something sacred you'd been forbidden to speak. Maybe you cried. Maybe you said too much. Maybe you didn't smile this time. And for the first time, you weren't easy to handle. And just like that, he changed. The warmth left his eyes. The kindness vanished from his tone. The patience, the presence, the so-called love, gone, replaced by silence. Dismissal. A quiet withdrawal that felt more violent than any scream. And that's when it hit you. The man who claimed to love you only loved the version of you that didn't need anything. Not comfort, not depth, not truth. He didn't love you. He loved his peace. And your emotions. Your real, messy, beautiful emotions. They threatened that peace. So he shut down. Shut you out. Shut the door on everything that made you human. But something else happened that day too. Something he didn't expect. You didn't chase him. Not this time. You didn't beg, didn't fold, didn't shrink. Because deep down, you finally saw what this really was. A performance you were never meant to keep up forever. You were exhausted, starving for real love, for real connection, for the kind of intimacy that doesn't flinch when you break. And once you saw the truth that he only stayed when you stayed small, you realized you had nothing left to protect. The mask fell, and what remained was the beginning of you. He wouldn't recognize you now, and that's okay, because you're no longer easy to handle. You're not soft-spoken when you're hurting. You don't apologize for crying. You don't ask for permission to feel. And that version of you, the one who sat quietly in pain, who smiled through emotional starvation, who thought love was about pleasing, she's gone, mourned, buried, honored. And in her place stands a woman who speaks, who demands, who chooses herself even when it makes others uncomfortable, especially then. There's no need for revenge, no final confrontation, no dramatic ending, just clarity, just distance, just peace, the real kind. The kind that comes when you no longer negotiate your worth. When you stop bargaining your needs in exchange for scraps of affection, when you no longer confuse comfort with safety, or silence with love, you're not harder to love now. You're just less willing to be loved in pieces. And to those who only knew the quiet version of you, you may seem colder, louder, sharper, but that's not rebellion, that's healing. So here you are. Not perfect, not healed all the way, but honest, awake, alive. You've stopped editing yourself for people who only wanted the easiest parts of you. You've stopped dimming your light just to make them comfortable in their shadows. And maybe, just maybe, that was the whole point. Not to be easy to handle, but to be fully, fiercely yourself. Because real love, it doesn't ask you to disappear. It doesn't punish your pain. It doesn't flinch when you feel deeply. Real love stays. Especially when you're not easy. Especially when you're real.